Hey everybody, Alex from SCADA Forge here. In this video we are going to take the Launchpad OEE project and extend it to allow us to track OEE based on batches, or what you might call production runs for various parts. Just a quick overview. To set this up, typically you would have some sort of recipe management screen. This would allow you to set up recipes by parts, set particular set points on your equipment, and basically create a part or a recipe for whatever you're creating with those parameters. And that can include various set points, production rates, cycle times, any notes to the operators, really anything that the operators would need to manage recipes on the production line. And then living above recipes, you would have batch management or production run management. This would allow you to create a particular batch that you're choosing to run on the line. And a batch consists of a recipe and may have some other additional information. Typically a batch ID would be used to signify what batch that is that you're running. That may be tied to a lot number, something from an ERP system, or generated based on your batch management tables. And each batch has a recipe that's going to run, and then you can, from there, do data analysis on particular batches instead of just on periods of time. So you could take like your start and end time of each batch, and in this case, track OEE for each batch in the system. In this case, we'll go to the settings page here. We don't necessarily need to do recipe management here because the rates already give us that basic functionality in the OEE project, so we'll leave that step out of this. We'll go here to manage rates. I added part ABC and part DEF here to the table. To do that, you just go to add new rate up here. Go to, we'll call this part XYZ. And let's say that's 10 units per minute. And we hit save new rate, and that will add that to the table. The one complication with this setup is this allows you to delete rates here. Typically in a production system, you would want to have rates that are, or recipes that are enabled or disabled. Because if we were to say create a batch with this information, with the given rate amount and the part name, and delete that, then we're going to break any batch management functionality. So typically you would set recipes, or in this case rates, to be disabled so they don't show up where the operators can select those, but they're still available in the database for any data analysis needs that you might have. So we're going to use rates for our recipe management, and then we'll create batches with the rate as a field in the batch. And if we take a look at the designer, and we go to day OEE, config, rate name. We'll see right now this is set to default here on line 1. This gets written based on what rate we have selected, and then our rate, which one is it? Target rate tooltip also gets written to whatever value we choose. So if we were to come back to our client, go to line view, actually go back to settings, line 1 rates, and let's say we want to do part XYZ. So we're going to load 10 units per minute instead of 15 from the default, and we click set. We see that our rate name changed to part XYZ, our target rate changed to 10, and our target rate tooltip is now part XYZ. So that will allow us to use rates instead of recipes and simplify batch management a little bit. So first we're going to create a batch table to store our batch information. To do that, we'll just go to the script library that we already have, and we have this nice init tables function. So we'll just copy and paste this and adjust what we need. So let's call this init batch table. And we only need one table, so we can clear all this out. And I'll just leave the indexes off. We'll call this ex_launchpad OEE batches. We will want an ID for batch IDs. We'll take a rate name and a target rate. Those will be we need the rate name to be able to know what rate we're looking at, and the target rate, we'll pull that across and we'll just store it in this table. To make our lives a little easier, we will create a start timestamp, and we'll copy paste that for an end timestamp so that we can track when our batch starts and ends for data analysis purposes. We'll leave shift out of that for now, and hour of day, we'll leave that out for now. And we'll leave all this information out as well. So we'll first, this will give us the ability to create our batch table, and then from there we'll be able to create batches, and then we'll also build a batch OEE table so that we can store batch OEE information specifically to pull into our line view or our production summary screen. Then we'll add, instead of our interval, we'll have day, shift, hour, we'll add batch to that, and then we'll pull up a table that lists what batches we've run. So we will come back and create some more tables in a little bit, but we'll go through creating a batch management screen first. So we can save this. We can then go to our script console, and we can type in exchange.launchpad and tab over to autocomplete.init batch tables, or init bat table, and we can execute that, and we see that that popped up here with another input line or output line from our Python script. So that means that executed. We could have also put something in the logs to print out that that happened. Now if we go back to Tools, Database Query Browser in the Designer, and we refresh, we'll see that we now have our ex_launchpad_OEE batches table with the relevant column names that we have set up here. And there's currently no data in there, which makes sense because we haven't added anything yet. So now we can go build a view to manage batches. So we'll take a look at that now. Alex from the future here. One thing that I forgot to add to the batch table is a batch name. So we will come here and put batch name as text. We're in read-write mode. We'll execute that. And now we have a batch name. So now we have everything that we need to build the form to create batches. So we'll dive into that next. And to be thorough, we will update our init batch table script here with batch name text. And now that we're set up with our script here, we will dive into creating a form to manage batches. Ultimately, we will add another section to the settings page so that we can load a batch to a line. And for our purposes here, we're going to basically replicate the rates page because this has all the functionality that we need to manage data in the database. In this case, we'll copy paste this view and update everything to reference batches instead of rates. So we can go back to our designer. This is the rates view. So this is everything that we need there. So we'll copy paste that. You can either right click and copy or Control C, and then we'll paste that into our views folder. And we will rename this batches. And then we will open that up. And this is our new batches screen. So we're basically going to go through starting at the top and update everything we need to look at batches instead of rates. So there's nothing on the view itself in terms of custom properties or parameters. If we look at the root container, we have a database custom property and a data custom property. And this is bound to a select rates named query. We're going to actually need this for a dropdown on our add edit field here. So we will keep that for now. And we will duplicate this and call it batch data. And this will be what we use to pull, instead of pulling rates into our table, we'll pull this, pull batch information into our table. So since that is tied to a named query, close the tag browser. We'll go to our named query section, and that was tied to our select rates query, which pulls in all of the rates that we have in there. So to make life easy, let's copy paste that, Control C, Control V. We will rename this to select batches, and we will open this up. I'll go to our authoring tab, and we're just going to pull everything across from our batches table. In this case, we will change rate to batches, and we'll just order by ID. Now if we go to testing, we will put in our database name, Launchpad _OEE, and hit execute. And we would expect no data to come across because we haven't put anything in there yet, but we see the columns from our batches table. So we'll hit save so that our named query is saved to the gateway. And we'll go back to our batches root container, to our batch data custom property. We will select the select batches named query there. And since we have a database custom property, we'll map to that in case that changes across the board. We'll hit OK there, and enter to accept. And now we see that we are pulling an empty data set of 0 rows and 7 columns across, which is what we would expect. And we see here our query has been updated to our named query, which is select asterisk from our batches table and order by ID. So we'll hit OK there. Now that's populated. We have a header label that is manage rates. We'll say manage batches. Under our actions flex container, we have a new batch button. Well, that would be rates if this wasn't the third time. We'll leave that as new batch. Change this to say add new batch. And then we see that this has an event action on it. So we'll hit Control J to see what that is. That is calling a message handler in perspective, which you use by calling system.perspective.sendMessage. Effectively, this sends an alert to any components or scripts or gateway items that have a message handler set up on them, and it will pass in the name of this as well as any parameters and things that we need, and then it will allow those to take action based on that. So we will change this to say batch, and we want to do this with a different name because if somebody has the rates page open and we call the rate message from the session, it may deselect whatever they have set up. So we'll hit OK there. Then we have a binding and a message handler on our table. So we see our property binding is on data, which is coming from parent custom.data, which is our rate information. We want to change that to be batch data, which will empty out our table since we don't have batch data. And this has a message handler on it, so we can either right-click and configure scripts, which is where message handlers exist, or we can press Control K. And we see this is the OEE table reset message handler that doesn't have anything set up on it. And this is set to a page for the scope, so that would only happen on the page that it's set up on. You can do an entire session or a specific view as well. We'll cover that in future videos. So we'll hit OK. Then we also have our add edit flex container down here. This is currently hidden because we are not in add edit mode. If we change that to display true instead of false, or if we go to play mode and click the add batch button, that would show up. This does have a script configured on it, so I hit Control K to pull that up. That is our rate mode message handler, so we'll change this to batch. And none of this is tied specifically to rates instead of batches, so we'll hit OK there. And just to show how that works, now if we click Add New Batch, this will show up. Now previously I had done some of these changes already to update some of this before I realized I did not create the batch name column, so we'll just go through that. Again, basically we'll go to play mode, took the rate name label, changed this from new rate entry and edit rate to new batch entry and edit batch based on if our table has a selection property set. Then the header, just change this from name for rate to name for batch. Then we have a name entry field down here. Under text entry, on that binding, if we're in add mode, we'll default to a new batch name instead of new rate name. Otherwise, we'll pull out the batch name column from our selection. And then under rate entry, we have a numeric field here. This will hold our target count. And let me make sure that's what we called it. So we'll go back up to our scripting, project library, Exchange, Launchpad, OEE. Okay, it looks like we also forgot to add that, so let me add that to the script. Then we will go to database query browser. We will alter table, add column. manager. And now we have target count. That's part of development, warts and all. So now this will pull across our ID target. So we'll just do 1 for now. That's fine. Then we have a current drop-down set up for interval right now, so we haven't updated this one yet. So right now, this would be, if we go to add new rate, that's hard-coded to minute and hour. For this, we want to tie this to our rate name. So basically, we're going to select, normally you would have a recipe name. In this case, we're going to select a rate name. So we will just leave that as default. If we're coming across for the first time, that'll select the default rate name. Otherwise, it would pull the rate name from our selected batch. So let's go to our options property on the dropdown. We're already pulling in all of our rates on the root container custom data property. So we'll bind to that. And then this is not in the right format for a dropdown. So we'll add a transform of script so that we can take this value and parse out what we want into the right format. So we'll create a new empty array. And we'll loop through all of our rows in our value data set. And we'll just create a new row variable and give that a value property, which will be our rate, target rate value, and a label, which will be our rate name variable. And then we'll add that to our data set with an append instruction. And finally, we will return data. And we'll see here under the script preview that gives us the right format. If we hit OK, we look at our options, we see that we have our rate name and our target rate. And if we look in the drop down here, we'll see that those populate. So that gives us everything we need there. For this label, we can go out of play mode here, select that. This has view params header. That has a bad not found binding. That's in the project, so let's just remove that. And we'll just replace this with target production count. Then we can go down to our actions, and let's take a look at our buttons here. We have a delete button that has a display binding. So if we're in delete mode and we have an event on there, so let's Control J into there. That gives us delete mode is equal to true. Let's look at our cancel button. That has an event. So this is giving us a send message to refresh rates. Let's change that to batches and change this to batch. Okay, that's good. And let's look at our save button. This has a big script. First, we'll change the binding here to save new batch. instead of rates. We'll hit OK there. And let's go back to our cancel. Let's do a search for this in the project just to see where that is at. And that was rates. And we'll select the open views. We'll do selected views. Let's do open, that's fine. It'll probably duplicate where that is. Let's see. Batches, root, container, message handler. Oh, we do have a root container message handler here. Then let's change this to dash batches. And we want to refresh our, we can actually leave that in case the rates get updated. And we can also do a batch data, and that will trigger those bindings to refresh in case the data has changed in the database. So we can hit OK there. So let's go to our save button, go to our event script here, and get this in the right spot. Actually, we'll just maximize it. Okay, so we want to update our batches table. We're pulling in from our scripting engine. We could also map this to the custom property on the root container if we wanted to. Let's call this batch name. Then our, let's see, we'll have target rate, and let's do rate name. And we can get rid of this binding. We'll update these. So our rate name, this will be mapped to our actions. Let's see. Actually, before we do that, let's make sure, we'll change this to be called batch entry. And we'll change this to be called rate. That'll make it a little easier to find what we're looking for here. So let's go into our save button and we'll start updating this script. We want this to be our batches table. We're pulling in the database name from our scripting library. We could also map that to the database property, custom property on the root container. We will have a rate name. We also want a batch name, and we can get rid of these for the moment. So our batch name will be equal to our name entry, text entry, props, text. We'll have to grab our target rate first because we can grab that directly from the drop-down menu under batch entry, rate, props value. Now, if we were doing this in a production environment, we would probably also want to add an ID column to our rate table and use that for the value instead of the target rate. Because if you had two different parts that had the same rate, this method won't apply. You would want to do that based on the ID, not the value. But for this purpose, we'll just do that based on the value. So we can do let's just put a 1 here for now, and we'll hit OK to save those changes. And to make life a little easier, let's do a new named query, get rate name. Then we'll go to authoring. We want to delete that row. We want to call this target rate, and we want to do a select rate name from ex underscore launchpad underscore OEE underscore rate, where target rate equals to target rate. And we can go to testing, enter a value of 20 here, execute, and that pulls across the rate name. So we can go back to our save button, Control J to go here, and we can do system.db.run named query. .exec query. And then let's minimize this. We will copy this path. We will put in target rate, and we'll just clear these out for the moment. Okay. And then we will need to update the scripting here, because this is calling something in our script library to write the data to the database if we're updating or if we're adding a new record. So we will dive into that here next. So we'll cancel out of this for the moment. We'll hit OK to save our changes. That was calling under the SQL script here, a run database insert. We'll just take a look at this. This is doing a prep update. So we're passing in parameters and building up a query here in the string. And then we're also doing a database update to edit records. And that is also building up a query with parameters and things. So we don't need to add anything to this script. We just need to build our parameters here appropriately. So this becomes, I guess we have rate name, so we can leave that. This can become batch name. And we have target rate. And we also want our target count. And that comes from our batch entry numeric entry field props value. So we can build this. Key rate name, that will be key batch ID, because that's what we're referencing for the batch ID instead of a rate name. So we'll pass in the ID parameter. We will pass in key batch name, and this becomes ID. And then we're effectively doing the same thing here with our parameters. So we'll just copy and paste that. And we will update our messages to batch and refresh batch is. And let's make sure that's what we called it here. Refresh batches, and I think it was on the cancel button. Control J. Refresh batches. Okay. So now we're in play mode. So let's do test batch. We'll give it 100 parts, and it'll be part ABC. And save new batch. And database query browser. Batches, that did not show up. So we will work through that in the next one. So now that we have our script set up, we'll hit OK to accept the changes. We'll go into play mode. We'll click add new batch. Call it test batch, give it a target production count of 100, and select part ABC, and we'll click save new batch, and it adds the ABC with our current rate and everything to this table. And just to verify, if we go to database query browser, we can double click on our OEE batches table to pre-populate the select all query, and we see our data in there. And you'll notice the line name and the start and end timestamp are empty. We will handle those when we load a batch to a line. Right now this batch just exists for an operator to select and add to a line and hit start. And if we want to click that, let's see, this gives us a couple errors here. We'll see what those are. Name entry, text entry. This is giving us, let's see, let's look at our table. This is part of development. This data set here does have batch underscore name. Let's make this wider. We just need to figure out why that is erroring out. Prop selection, data 0, batch name. Selection, data. Okay, so this has 4 columns set up. Okay, so we also need to go through our columns here. So we have rate name, target rate. This is, okay, so we'll just update these. So we want this to be ID with a label of batch ID. We want column 1 to be batch name with a header of batch name. 2, this can be rate name. Rate name is our header. And target rate with target rate. Okay, so we can cancel this. We'll reselect. And we don't have production count, so let's add that in there also. This will be target count. And so basically what we're doing here is we're going into our data set, and the field is going to match the column name here in the data set, and then the text display on the header matches what's under our header. So if we cancel this, then we select that, that all works. We will notice that the drop down is not pre-selected, so we can go look at the drop down. Now let's go to rate, our value. We want this to be target rate. Because that's selecting based on the value of target rate, not the name. So if we click here, that now selects part ABC. So if we were to, let's say, make this test batch edit, make this 200, and select part DEF, we can save changes, and we have a key batch name is not defined. I thought we did that. Key batch ID. So now that we have those updates made, we can hit save changes. Sometimes the play mode acts a little wonky. And that did not update. Table data set is ID SQL database update. key batch ID table dot prompt selection 0 data dot ID. Okay, so it did save changes, but not our rate name. So let's go to our update. So we have rate name. Oh, this I have hard coded. So we hit save and everything updates and we are good to go. Just make sure it should match what we see here. Yeah, we have DEF 25, test pass edit, and target count of 200. And part DEF, if we look at the rate table, is a value of 25. So that gives us the ability to add and edit new batches to our table. So next we can go through and add a manage batches screen to our client so that we can look at things there. And then after that, we will go to create the field here where we can load the batches to a line, which will follow a roughly similar process where we'll use our get batches query to build up a dropdown and then have a set, or I guess in our case, we'll have a start batch button, and then we'll calculate the duration of the batch based on the rate and the total production count. And then that will allow us to tie into the OEE data as well. And then we can build a production summary screen from there. So we'll first go up to perspective in the project browser, because we'll first need to add a URL for that. So we will go here, we'll create a new page, select batches. Our primary view will be Exchange, Launchpad, OEE, Views, Batches. And let's just look at the settings. Everything looks the same in terms of sidebars and all that. So that should be good. So we can hit save. Then we can go here, type in batches, and that loads up our batches page. So now we'll go to the header. Which I believe is under embedded views header. And right now we're in the large breakpoint container. So we can go to buttons. We can just copy and paste that here. And you can certainly do all this from scratch. I find if you have functionality that already exists and you're trying to replicate that, in this case, making settings into or rates into batches, it's generally a little easier to take something you know is already working and copy and paste what you need from there. So we'll change this to say batches. We have an event script, so we can Control J on that. This gives us a navigation action on action performed. So we'll just do batches instead of settings and hit OK. And then that gives us also, there's an event script, so we can hit Control K And this gives us a navigation message handler that sets that button to selected. So if we hit save, now we see, we'll go back to settings so we can see the page change. This takes us to batches. It doesn't update our button though. So what we're looking at is, if we click settings, we see that the settings button changes. And if we go to batches, it does not. So digging into that a little bit, I found, because we had copied the rates page, which is a like a sub page of settings. This is not bringing across something from the settings page. So if we look at configure events on the root container of the settings page, we're calling a prospective send message from there. So we can copy that, and then we can go to our batches page, go to on startup script, and we can paste this and change this to batches and hit OK. And double quote, take that out, hit OK. Then we can save, and now that works. Now the way this is set up is configure scripts. So when this message handler is called, it checks to see if the payload is equal to the name of this component, which is batches. If it is, it changes it to selected. If it's not, it's unselected. And we're not calling this message handler because that is done when this screen goes through its on startup script. So this is the settings view. Now that we added that to our batches view, we're good to go there. So if we had copied either settings, production summary, overview, or a line view, we would have gotten that automatically. And that's more a function of how this project is developed than anything else. So if you are copying existing functionality and you find that something doesn't work like you would expect, then you can troubleshoot from there. And part of that process was, we'll just go through configure events, configure scripts, message handler. So what we can do for troubleshooting is we can do create a logger variable is equal to system.util get logger, and we'll give it a name. And then we can do logger.info. And I can say payload. So what this will do, this gives us a logger instance by calling system.util.getLogger, sets the logger variable equal to that, and then we can call a function on the logger instance called info, and there's other options available, and that will allow us to write something to the Ignition logger, which is on the gateway. So if we hit save here, and we go to, now if we click batch, we're on the batches page. If we click batches here, and we go to here, we'll see that we have our batch nav logger with an info class here, writing our payload to what we're looking at here. And you'll see that when we click settings, it shows up as well, because we are doing that outside of the if statement here. So that gives you an example of any time you're calling a message handler, In this case, they're all set up on page, but since they all exist on that same page that we have loaded, it's calling this message handler for each of these buttons. So even when we click settings, it's still hitting the batches message handler, and it is displaying that there. And I wasn't seeing anything displayed when I added this to the batches button, but I did see, like if I click settings or production summary, I would see those logged, but I wasn't seeing it when I did batches. So the next step there was to say, what's different about batches, the screen I added versus the settings page. So I opened up the settings view, and I also did a find and replace on all views, open views, all views, do find, and I scrolled down to the bottom to where I see script, and I see a script on startup here on the settings root container. So then I went to the settings root container, went to events, and immediately saw that and was able to fix that issue. So that is one way to troubleshoot in Ignition. You can use loggers to write to your logger, and you get to that by going to diagnostics logs once you're logged into your Ignition gateway. So hopefully that helps clear up how to troubleshoot some stuff in Ignition. In Vision, you could do that a little easier because you have, if I can select it, tools, you have the console here. This will give you a lot of information in the designer perspective is a little bit different in how it handles logging things and writing to the console because everything's executing on the gateway server. So we'll see different things in there than we would see in Vision. So using loggers, or you can also use some print statements and things, can be pretty helpful. So while we have that figured out, let's also go to our small, and here we have the same buttons. We can simply copy paste settings, and we'll see that we have a new button here. We'll call this batches. Let's select a new icon here. Let's search for batch prediction. That works for the time being. Then we will go to configure events, navigation. We'll select batches again. And let's look here to configure scripts. This has the same message handler on it that we have on the large buttons. So now if we save this, we go to our browser and we make this smaller, and we're on the batches page. So now you'll see that that is selected, and we have a new button here on the top. So that handles navigation to our batches page. And then if we maximize this, we go to the large breakpoint container. So if you were on a mobile device or a tablet, this is the view that you would see with the bottom section here squished down with a scroll bar on the table. And if you're on a browser or a prospective workstation instance with a larger resolution, you would see this here. So now let's go back to our designer, and we have the settings page open. So we can expand this. So now we have, scroll up to the top, we have our line selector, our schedule editor, our rates manager, which is not displayed. And our line rate section, and then our global section. Just as a design aesthetic, one thing I would do once we have our database set up, I would probably hide these components just so you're not seeing those on the screen every time you look it up, or you could lock those behind, say, an administrator role, because you don't necessarily want operators going through and clicking things like that if they don't need to be. But we do have the overall OEE target in here, so that would be valuable to have on the screen. Probably would lock that behind an admin role though. But since we want to now be able to manage batches, since we already have all of our line selection and everything set up on this page, we can make a copy of our line rates section here. And paste to the root container. And we can we move that over here? Then we can click and drag that up here above our project settings. And now we see line rate 0 here. So let's rename this to line batches. Then within this, we have a header. This pulls in our selected line and adds rates to it. So we will add, replace that with batches. Then let's see, target rate is hidden. We can delete that. We don't need that. Yes. Current rate val is hidden. We can leave that for now, and we'll display what our current batch is. Then here we have a rate selector. So this gives us a drop down. We would replicate that for selecting a batch. Then label, we can change this to batch. We can rename this to current batch. We can rename this to set batch and manage batches. And then we can delete outfeed and reject multiplier because we don't need those for loading batches. And on our button, let's go to manage batches and change the text to manage batches. Okay, so let's get the easiest one out of the way first. We'll hit Control J. We will we already have that view set up, so let's Control J. Let's delete this script and just do navigation to batches. And again, if you want that, if you want the manage batches to be showed here, we could set that up if we want to. In this case, we'll just set that to navigate to our batches screen. So if we go to settings and click manage batches, that takes us to our batches screen. That's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another, depending on how you want to do that. Since we're going a little long on this one, we'll keep it simple and just navigate to that page. And we'll see we have an error on current batch, which is our label. If current rate.props.value. We can rename this current batch. Okay, so we have batches. And let's see, this is hidden right now. Let's see what that's bound to. If current rate, props.value, custom tag value. We'll come back to that one after we set up some tags to manage our OEE here. So first we will get our batch selection drop-down set up. So here you'll see we have a binding for options. This gives us a custom.data property binding. So that's similar to what we saw on the batches page. So if we come down to custom, this is tied to our rate selection to keep things consistent. Let's do, we'll just copy paste this. That's not what we wanted to copy paste. Copy. Oops, we're on the wrong one. Duplicate. Call this batch data. And we want this to be tied to our select batches named query. And this becomes Launchpad OEE. Actually, is that a property? Let's actually cancel that and see what this is bound to. Okay, so we have a root custom database. So we will query exchange launchpad OEE select batches select. We will paste that in, and that gives us one row with 8 columns, which is what we would expect because we have one batch in the system right now. So now we can go to, we're on the drop down, so we can go to options, and ours was a little simpler in terms of how much code there was, but we can adjust this to meet what we need here. So our value is going to be rate name. We want that to be batch name, and our label. Actually, let's do value batch name. It's fine. Let's do ID on that. Then we have a known unique quantity. And this is going to give us formatting. So if we wanted to do, say, batch name, rate name, and target rate, correctly, and target count. If we can spell, and get rid of our duplicate there. Yeah, so this is effectively the same thing that we did on the other drop-down for rate selection. We're just creating an array, doing a for loop to loop through all the options in value, creating a new row, and then appending that to the array. And this is simply breaking out the structure into a formatted string, which is fine. Let's say target count rate. See what that gives us. So if we go to play, it gives us test batch edit, rate part DEF, 25, target count 200. I don't think we need the rate in there. Is that? I'll put a colon there. Test batch edit. So that's our batch name, then our rate and part. So that would be like recipe info and our overall target count. So that gets us batches in our drop-down menu here. And gives us a batch ID for our value, and our overall label is that. And if we were to select this, then our value becomes 1 to match our value here because we have selected row 0. So that's how to configure that. Next, we'll take a look at the tags so that we can set this up if we're running a batch currently, or we're going to set up a new batch on this line. Okay, so for the tags, we're going to reset our panels. We will take a look at our current tags. So if we go to Exchange, Launchpad, OEE, Demo, line 1, you'll see that we have some configuration tags, including our target rate that we looked at earlier. This gives us a tooltip that matches our current part being run. Rate name, rate time, etc. What we're displaying, data that's coming from the simulator to give us production counts. Then we have day OEE, which includes all of our various day-related OEE parameters. We also have hourly OEE, whether this is enabled, and then we give it a line name and path. And then we have schedule and shift information, which we're not currently taking advantage of. So what I want to do is, we have daily and hourly OEE. I want to also create batch OEE so we can track on a batch basis. So to add that, I'm going to go to UDT definitions. Go to line config, because that's our overall line config tag here that includes everything we just looked at. I'm going to click here to create a new data type instance and select OEE/OEE. And I'm going to rename that batch OEE. And if we look at our OEE, we don't have any parameters or anything. And that gives us what we need to start tracking our batch OEE. So we can hit OK here. And if we go to look at our tags, we now see that we have a batch OEE value. And this is going, since we created this, it's going to automatically start everything. The key components, we need to set it enabled. We'll set a duration of 3600 to match our hourly. And let's see, our state is currently 1, so we should be running. Let's see, our run seconds is increasing. Seconds elapsed since we started. See, our idle seconds is adjusting accordingly. And our A, P, and Q are showing up. And you'll see that the P is currently above 100%. It's not out of the question that you could have that in normal conditions if you're running faster. That's probably more of a function of just the way that the math is working out, but we will work on that as we populate these tags. And this will effectively break some of the stuff if there's anything tied to our target rate tooltip. That's going to be adjusted once we load the batch information into the mix here, but we're going to that'll really be the only thing that could go wonky, because we're going to replace that with our batch ID, but our target rate value will, and our rate name and rate time, we'll pull those across based on our rate name parameter in the batch table. So now that we have those tags added, we're going to also go up to our script, and this creates a shift and an hour OEE table. So we will copy our hour OEE table. Actually, we'll copy this whole function. And then we can take this index out. Batch. We'll give this a start timestamp. We can get rid of these ones. Then we want OEE hour. So we can come up here, we can delete OEE shift and OEE config. And we're going to create an OEE batch table. This will have an overall ID for this entry. We also want batch ID. That'll be an integer. We want a start timestamp and an end timestamp. We can get rid of shift, day, hour of day. We'll keep line name, tag folder. We'll keep elapsed running, down, and idle. Let's rename those to batch. If I can type. Start raw. Batch production count, target production count, start raw, batch reject count, out feed, and then we can do and then we updated our index name there, so we'll just create an index on those, and we will call this init batch OEE tables. We'll go back to our script console, and we'll go exchange.launchpad.oee.init batch OEE tables, and execute that. We see that we came through properly there. Just check and make sure under database query browser. It's down here at the bottom. Refresh. And we see an Ignition OEE batch that has all of the columns that we created earlier. So that will allow us to store our batch specific OEE information. And we will get into setting up the tags and starting a batch next. So the first thing we need to do is be able to write to our batch OEE table. So if we come up to our scripting engine and our OEE library, we'll see that we have a record hour start and record hour end function. I will start with those as a basis. So we will copy these. We will paste them down at the bottom, and we'll rename these record batch end and record batch start. And we have our table structure here, so we can use that to build up our various columns that we need. So the first thing is, instead of an hour, we're going to pass in a batch ID. Start time, we'll need line name, and line value we'll keep for the moment. We need to insert a record into our OEE batch table. And if we come up here, we can start to build up our structure here. So we want to pass in our batch ID. So we will add that. UTC timestamp. Start timestamp. We got rid of shift. We'll leave end timestamp as null for now. We want line name, and I'm simply going through up here what columns we're looking at compared to what's down here. So we have line name, tag folder, We got rid of day timestamp and hour timestamp and hour of day. We have batch seconds elapsed, batch seconds running, batch down seconds, batch idle seconds, start production count, raw production count. This is batch production count. We have start, reject, raw, and batch reject count. And then outfeed factor, reject factor, target rate, rate name. Then these all become batch OEE A, batch OEE P, batch OEE Q, batch OEE, batch rates, and batch timestamp. And then we added a batch ID. So we'll go through our parameters, and the question mark is going to be replaced with a value that we'll pass into a system prep update call. So we'll go through these and make these match our column. So we have batch ID, UTC timestamp, start timestamp. We got rid of shift. We have line name, tag folder. We got rid of day timestamp, hour timestamp, and hour of day. Just clear out hours, so we have seconds elapsed, running seconds, down seconds, idle seconds, start production count, raw production count, batch, start raw, and batch reject count, outfeed factor, reject factor, target rate, rate name, OEEA, OEEP, OEEQ, OEE, rates, and timestamps. Okay. Now we get into our params. These are what are going to be passed into these question marks here. So let's see, we got rid of shift. And we got rid of hour of day, day timestamp, and hour timestamp. And we want to params.append batch ID, which is passed into our function. So let's make sure these line up in the right order. So we have batch ID, UTC timestamp, start timestamp, line name, tag folder. Seconds elapsed would be 0 since we're just starting out. Running seconds would be 0 because we're just starting out. Downtime and idle are 0 because we're just starting. Then we grab our start production counter at the beginning of the run. Then we go to our batch production count would be 0. A reject counter we grab from the PLC. Our batch reject count would be 0 since we haven't rejected anything yet. Then we pull in, let's see, outfeed factor, reject factor, target rate, rate name, and then we're starting out with 100% for all of our OEE at the beginning of the run. And we pull in our target rate and our current timestamp. And now that will insert a row into our batch OEE table. And now that did not grab, I didn't copy everything over. So let's do record hour end. Oh, I thought I minimized that. There we go. Then we want to rename this batch end. And we want to also pass in a batch. Actually, we'll replace our start time with batch ID. So this will record when our batch ends and give us the relevant OEE information there. So we'll rename our table. We'll update our UTC timestamp. We will update our end timestamp. Raw production count, raw reject count. These all become batch instead of hour. And we can simply do where batch ID okay, so now we will go through our parameters. So we're pending UTC timestamp, end timestamp, raw production count, raw reject count. And then we're pulling in some other options here. We'll replace these hour OEE with batch OEE, so we pull from the right tags. Replace hour production count, batch OEE, make this batch OEE. Oops, we want these to be capitalized. Okay, then we got rid of our line name. And this becomes batch ID. Let's make sure we have the same count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17. We have 17 parameters. We have 17 question marks. So now that will give us the end of our batch OEE table. Update. Now I dug into this a little bit before the video, but I know that when our current interval value changes, we have a script on here that will run through, pull up all of this relevant data and call that function. So since we're doing this under batch OEE instead of hour OEE or day OEE, we'll just go into our UDT definition under line config. We'll go to batch OEE. We'll go into our current interval script, and we will update this to call our new functions here. Okay, so we'll click the little circle here. When it highlights green, that means that we have overridden what was inherited from the parent. We'll see here, this is creating a logger instance that we can use to log what we're looking at if we want to for diagnostic purposes. We're doing an array of read paths. That's going to read all of these values from our tag structure. Then we're going to read all of those tag paths. We're going to grab a start counter, reject counter, line name, interval start type, if we're enabled, and so on. And then if it's not the first time this has changed, which is pretty common on tag change scripts, in case you're starting up the gateway, you don't want to execute this right away. Or previous interval started and enabled. So basically, when it changes, when we create a new instance of this tag and we have not recorded the start time yet, we want to read one of our tag values, set our start and reject counter to 0, which I guess we're technically already doing in our script up above. Then we're grabbing our start interval, and let's change our interval type to batch. Record batch end. And based on our function, that needs to become batch ID. So we'll do a placeholder for that for the moment. And we'll go through the tag, how we're going to manage that on the tags here in a minute, but we will replace this with batch ID. Then we are going to grab our run down, start reject, and start times here, and our rate history. And then we're going to write values to those. we'll replace this with batch and record batch start. And I believe that requires our batch ID here. And we're not doing shift in this since we're not going through that. We'll just delete this line here. Okay, so that should be everything we need in our script, except for our batch ID. We just hard-coded to 999 for the moment. So we can hit OK. And then we also want to come over here and change our interval type to batch under our batch OEE instance. And we can now come over here and change this. We'll put in 0. Oh, that's a function. We can't write to that. One other thing we need to do is underline config under batch OEE current interval. This is currently an expression tag. We'll just change that to a memory tag because we're going to write to that value for our batch ID instead of previously, if we look at our OEE, this expression looks at the current hour. So when the hour of the day changes, it will get a new value and update and then run the change script, which we want to not do in the case of our batch OEE. We want to control what that value is. So we'll hit OK. Back to tags, and let's see. I don't know if changing that to a 0 did anything. So let's change that to a 1. And that did not write anything. Let's see if we have any errors. Log in. Diagnostics logs. Okay, so we have an error coming from line 32 in value changed to line 1208 in record batch end. Our start time is not defined. We forgot to update that, so we come down to 1208. This becomes, let's see, and this is record batch end. Okay, so this was a parameter to our function that we were calling previously. So for that, we need to grab our seconds elapsed since our batch start time. So we will need to pull that out of our record up above. So what we can do, just to make that simple, we can do batch start time equals to system.db.run a scalar prep query. And actually, we'll just run this. Let's see, run scalar prep query to select start timestamp from EX Launchpad OEE batch where batch ID equals question mark, and we want to pass in our batch ID and put database name. That will grab our start time of the batch, and we can go to batch start time, which is what we named our variable. We can hit save. And now if we change this, that did not update. And oops, we have an extra E in there. Save that. We're just basically testing out to get a record in the database here, which it also did not. And we don't have a value there, so we want to look at why this is not executing our because we need a previous start interval to be none. And probably the easiest way to do that is copy this, tools, script console, just do system dot, tag dot write. Execute that. Value of 2 means that successfully wrote. So now our previous interval is null. And then if we change our current interval again, we should see our end timestamp populate, and then we get a new record inserted into the database, which is again hard-coded to 999. So we will fix that next. So for that, we can go back to our batch OEE current interval script. And we're going to use our current interval to basically be our batch ID. So we can just say current value dot value, which if we look at our parameters, we have a current value qualified value, which if we just do current value dot value will give us our batch ID. And for record batch end, we can do previous value dot value, and that will take whatever the old value was instead of our current batch ID, so that we'll look at the right row in the table. So we can hit OK there. Then we can go back to our script console. We can re-execute this to set our start time back to none. So we create a new record. So let's change this to a value of 1. This will match our this will match the batch ID that we have in the table. And we'll clear all this out for some more testing, but we'll hit that. And we should see a new record added with a batch ID of 1, populating all of our data. And we'll let this run for a little bit, and then we will hit end so that we see some data updated. So now that we've run for a little bit, we'll just change this to 999, and we should see our end timestamp on this row updated with all of our relevant OEE information pulled across, and good to go. And for testing, we will reset our start time value to none. And go back to designer. We'll just delete everything from this table for now. Okay. Now that we're writing to the database, we can go back to our view. Under settings. Now we can go to our set batch button. Look at the script on that, and we'll edit this script. We're not doing shift data, so we can take that out. So now we can go to our set batch button on our settings page, and we will edit the event here. First, we're not messing with shift information, so we can clear that out. Let's see. So we're going to keep a lot of this because we're still writing to our rates tag, and then we're also going to write to our current interval tag in our OEE instance to manage that. The main difference is that we will want to adjust where our rate is coming from, since we're going to pull that from our batch and which rate we're pulling in from that. So if we hit OK here, we go Tools, Database Query Browser. We'll close this for some more room. And we look at batches. We have a rate name in here and a target rate. So instead of pulling from this drop down here, we will want to point this script to query out of the database there. So to do that, we'll just leave all of this here, and we'll focus on changing our data.target rate to pull from our database. And we know if we have our batch selected here, view, reset panels, and we select our drop down. We know that we're pulling a batch ID based on the value property there. So we can go back to here. We can go batch ID is equal to our line batches current batch drop down props value. Then we can say target rate equals system.db.run scalar prep query. And a scalar query just returns a value out of the database, so we don't have to dig into the data set that gets returned. So we can just do select target rate from what's our table name is tools database query browser from EX Launchpad OEE batches where ID is equal to question mark. Then we can pass in batch ID as our parameter, and database is equal to, I believe we have a property on our root container custom database. So that will give us our target rate from our batches table. We can just use that variable here. And we'll just assume everything's in minutes for this purpose. If we're going to go through and do hour, day, shift, etc., we would add some more scripting there. So that will give us everything we need here. Then we'll need to write to our current interval tag, which we can go and figure out self.parent.custom.path is up here. This is pulling in our overall write path, so we can hit OK there. We'll close database query browser. We'll go up to our parent. Let's see what our path tag is here. This is config target rate. So to make life easier, let's duplicate this. We'll call this batch path, batch OEE path. And we will copy our binding and paste our binding. And this gives us Exchange Launchpad OEE /demo /line1 down to here. /config /target rate. And we're building up a string here with some parameters that get passed in. So we want to change this to be batch OEE / current interval. And that will take us down to our current interval tag that we have selected over here. We can hit OK. Go back to our set batches tag, and we want to do batch path is equal to root containers, oops, not root container, line batches, current batch, custom batch OEE path. Then we already have our batch ID up there, so we can do system.tag.write. I'll just do blocking, pass in an array with our batch path, pass in another array with batch underscore ID, and we can hit OK here. And we reset our start time. So now, if we go to play, we have this batch selected. We can hit set, and we get an error. Basically, updating this dropdown from the line 1 rates to batches breaks this selected data property, which is what we're pulling in here for our data. So what we can do to fix that is we can come here to our dropdown, because this is where we're selecting our batch information, and we're actually pulling in our rate name here as our tag value property. So to fix that, we can go to our current batch flex container, and where we're pulling in rate name, we can go to current batch, custom tag value, hit OK, hit enter, and that will run this query and return our rate from there. So we can hit OK. That gets set properly. So with that fixed, we can click set, and now that sets our current interval tag to 1. Then we can go to database query browser, look at our batch table, and we see that we now have a record of that in the database. So now let's go to the client. Sometimes the designer goes a little wonky. Then we will add a new batch. We will call this test batch 2. Let's select part DEF and put in 500 parts. Save new batch. Now we have that selected. We can go back to settings. We can select that, click set. We'll see that that writes our current interval to 2. And if we look at database query browser, we'll see our line 1 batch, or our batch ID 1 is over now, and we have a new record for 2. Now the last piece of the puzzle is we have an error here on current batch. that is bound to our current rate prop stop value. Let's change this to current batch hit apply. That will fix that. And I believe we had header current rate value. We also have a current rate tag here. Let's change this to current batch. This is looking at current batch path. We actually want that to look at clear that. Look at our current batch custom batch OEE path tag. And that will give us our current batch ID that we're running. And we can go let's move that back there. And this display property is bound. And we can change this to batch it's giving us an error. Stale current rate. Current batch true. That shows if we have a value bound there. Current batch prop stop value. Current batch props dot value. Okay. So in that case, we can rename this current batch value. Text is fine. And actually, we'll just look at our current batch, custom batch OEE path. And we'll just say if that's greater than -1, 1, 0, true. It's going to be a problem. String found, Boolean expected. There we go. Perfect. So no errors. If we were to end the batch with nothing running, we could set this to -1 and add some scripting to handle that. But now we're showing what our current batch is running as. If we want to select a new batch, we can do that. Another thing we could do in terms of a production system is we could add either a batch started or batch ended to the query, or we can hide what we're running here if we want to update our select batches and say, if we wanted to put in, we could do this based on the OEE table if we wanted to put in where the end time is not null, but we'll leave that out of this since this video is getting pretty long and we have basically covered all the functionality. So now that gives you the ability to create and manage batches using the existing rates in this project as recipes. If you were to build a full recipe and batch management system in a new project, then we would have some more functionality similar to how we did the manage batches screen. We would add a manage recipes screen and set up whatever we need for all of our recipes from there. So thank you for watching. Have a great day.